You're listening to the Nerd to Know Media Network. Join us at nerdtoknowmedia.com.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Bite Size Britain. And with this episode, again, I'm taking a trip, probably a bit more down my my memory lane, back into my childhood memory bank, to somewhere that is really, it's stuck with me since my childhood, and it's somewhere that I've been able to revisit in recent years, and also view it from, through the wonderment in my own children's eyes, I suppose. They've really taken to it as well, which has been great. So we're taking a trip over to the Isle of Wight, which is a small island just off the coast of southern England. You can travel over there from Portsmouth and Southampton, and it's a lovely place. I had vague memories of it from going over when I was a kid on various day trips and family holidays. I had a new appreciation of it when we started going over there ourselves only a few years ago, and we actually, our kids were so taken with it. One place in particular that I'm going to take you to today is a place called Blackgang Chine. Many people will be familiar with it themselves anyway, for having gone over there. I think if you visit the Isle of Wight, it's one of those places that ends up on your must-see list. It's sort of, you see any visitor's guide of the Isle of Wight, and this is in must be the top 10 attractions, places to visit. If you head to the south of the island, the island, you can get around the island anyway quite nicely, probably within a day, so it doesn't take you very long to get down there. It's sort of tucked away at the south of the island. You have a lovely little village called Blackgang, which sits above a place called Chale Bay. So the term chine refers to, it's another word for coastal ravine, really, and the actual chine that was called Blackgang, the actual Blackgang Chine has been destroyed, in I don't know, the last couple of centuries or something, maybe. So the actual chine itself is no longer there, and it's mainly due to erosion, landslides, that because of its proximity to the sea. Blackgang has also been dubbed over the years the disappearing village, because parts of it do suffer and fall away. And as much as it's a lovely place to be, it's sad, really, in its history, how much of it has gone. Even looking at a map, I suppose, over the last sort of 20-30 years of what was there before and sort of where everything is now. Actually, and I've only found this out a few years ago when I was doing some personal research ahead of planning our first family trip over there. And I had vague memories of Blackgang Chine, certain things that were there. Thankfully, things that are still there to this day. But I really wanted to read up on the history of it, because I did find out a few interesting things, which did send me down a bit of a rabbit hole. But one thing I didn't know until then was it's actually the oldest theme park in the UK, which I thought is a great thing to be known for. You think of the likes of Thorpe Park and Alton Towers and that. Blackgang Chine was there first. And it was actually opened back in 1843. So it's not long celebrated. It's 175 years. Obviously now it's sort of 178 years, I think now. My calculations are right. And it was opened up by the DeBell family, and it's been in the same family all this time. And even before that, it really did have some history of its own around Blackgang and Chale Bay, which sort of lends itself then. It's sort of the reason for some of the themes that you'll find. So, Blackgang Chine, I've said to many people is a place that's sort of one of a kind. You really have to go there to kind of appreciate the charm of it. Some people will call it tacky in places. Some people will call it creepy in others. I think it is all that and more. It's such a fascinating, odd, but really wonderful place to go. It puts you in a completely different world, really, and it has many themes. It's many lands throughout it. I mean, you think of a theme park and it's got different zones or whatever. It's essentially all the same. Still, the same kind of ethic behind it. You've got thinking that, like, you've got nursery rhyme land where you can see sort of models or animated, depictions almost of old fairy tales, and you've got the underwater kingdom, which is fairly new. You've got 2 pirate ships there that you can, as kids, or as adults, you can play along, go between the 2, fire water cannons at each other, and it's got a singing pet shop, which is amazing. A lot of and also the crooked house, which I can't forget, because that is actually one of the earliest memories that I've always been told about by my grandparents. Apparently, when I first went over there, I absolutely hated it. I screamed my head off. It's this really kind of small house that you walk through, and it's got really uneven floors. It's crooked house by name and nature, and you look in various windows throughout it into different rooms, and they've got sort of scenes set up really, so it's got that real retro feel to it. And the fact that a lot of these have got that really quite old look to them probably gives them a creepy feel, which is, people like me, which I find brilliant. But you've got all these different sort of lands that you can walk around, and my little boy is mad on dinosaurs, and even going back to, I think, the 60s, they put these big model dinosaurs in there. They've upgraded it somewhat in recent years with proper animatronic displays, T-Rex and everything that you can walk through, a bit like Jurassic Park, I suppose. They are still, although they're keeping a lot of the older things there for nostalgia value, I suppose, they are still upgrading the park and trying to sort of keep up to date. And but what really strikes you as you're walking through there is the view. You could be walking around most of it, and you just look out and you just see the open sea, because you're on that very sort of southern tip of the island, and it's such a lovely place to be, especially if you go the right times of the year. For that reason, it's quite quiet, even though it's busy there. You don't really hear the noise necessarily, because you can just look out to sea a bit, like I do sometimes. You look out to sea and just feel calm. It's just a really, really unique place to be. But the main sort of themes that run through it, you've got say like a haunted house sort of thing there. It's a little bit more than that. I will touch on it probably. One story in particular that really grabbed me was before the park actually opened in 1836, in October that year, there was a shipwreck. A cargo ship called the Clarendon was wrecked just off of Shell Bay at the bottom of Blackgang Chine. As the story goes, I think it was coming back from the West Indies, and it ran into a storm, I believe, and was sort of grounded possibly, or hit rocks. The ship went down, and I think it was 28. There were 28 people on board that were lost, and I used that history immediately when we were planning for this family trip over there. It spurred something in me that I then had all these ideas for stories come forth, and I actually used the sinking of the Clarendon as a major part in the book that eventually became Blackgang Jack Trail, which has also then since morphed into being a big part of my book A Necessary End. So it's probably this mixed with other shipwrecks, sort of like the Mary Rose, which I'm sure I will dedicate another episode to at some point. It's my fascination with maritime disasters, I suppose, shipwrecks, that kind of thing. These real disasters that happen at sea. It really did spur my imagination, and then I found out that they'd actually the Clarendon itself had been worked into part of one of the new attractions at Blackgang Chine when we went there. When they created the underwater kingdom, it was they got just like this upturned ship that kids can crawl through, and it's just like a bit of a play, part of a playground sort of thing. And apparently that is modelled on the Clarendon. That's sort of an homage to that. And also, I mean, one of the biggest things that the park was known for when it first opened, his first big attraction, was it actually displayed a skeleton of a fin whale that had beached just near the Needles, which is, again, it's a natural rock formation, one of the biggest and most famous attractions over on the Isle of Wight, which is actually, I think, from the west side of the island. But I think it was Alexander Dubell that originally created the park. He acquired this skeleton of this fin whale, and he displayed it, and sort of henceforth created Blackgang Chine into this real sort of curiosity attraction for Victorian tourists. And that whale skeleton is actually still there. This is one of the things that I love about it. These things that they had way back when they started, they've still got. And they actually display it in a little museum now, which has the story of the whale. And I think when Queen Mary visited there one day as well, and a famous story attached to that. So when it was first opened back in 1843, the layout of it obviously was similar, but I mean it was situated in the same place at the top of the top of the chine. You had walkways down to see like the landscape gardens down the cliff and everything. They have obviously since fallen away, and I think the last big landslide that occurred in Blackgang was in 1994, and you can actually still, this is something else that I found out before I went over there, and something that I or at least before one of our trips there, you can actually see the point at which this landslide occurred, because there's still road closed signs. You can basically, the main military road, as they called it, fell away, and this road still exists, and it still basically goes to an end point where it used to go further, but no longer exists. And they've still got road closed signs. They've still got fences up that obviously stop people going past there on this really quite vulnerable piece of land now. But there's that element of its history mixed with, until recently, there was a part of the amusement park that was still there, but it had been left kind of abandoned, called Adventureland, and it had in there like a space shuttle launch kind of building that you could play around in. It had a Wixty roundabout, which was obviously when the last major landslide happened, they closed that element of the park off. Over years, Blackgang Chine have had to move their park inland slightly, or parts of it, because of the risk now of parts of it still falling away at some point. And this roundabout existed, and it was just on the edge of the cliff almost, and it became a real focal point for locals and fans of the park itself. And it's a really eerie site. I went there, luckily they have moved the roundabout now, they have removed it. Hopefully they will do something with it at some point, but I even got to visit that bit, and I managed to find where it was and drove down to it, and it was really eerie seeing the remains of this part of the park, which it just had to be abandoned, and that mixed with the horror of an event like a landslide, that like what happened in 1994, I used again in another story which featured in my book Blackgang, which still exists in A Necessary End. So it had this history with me as a child going there, and it being this real unique, memorable place. even though I couldn't remember bits about it, it's always still sat with me that I wanted to go back. And then when I went back a few years ago, it's brought all those memories back and more, and gave me a new appreciation of what, firstly how fragile things can be. Firstly, the actual at one point, in time, the village may not be there much, or big parts of it continue to get smaller, and one day it may just disappear forever, which is a really, really sad thought. But it's got these bits of history which are tied to that part that are tied to Blackgang, which are almost immortalized in this adventure park, which, like I say, is like no other. And if you're listening to this and really not sure what it is I'm on about, you need to get on YouTube, get on the internet, or even get yourself over there and go to Blackgang Chine and experience it for yourself. Because there's been people, I think, film videos, like vlog videos for YouTube about it, because it's one of those really odd, extraordinary places that you have to see to believe. But yeah, just it's. Before I kind of finish this off, there's one major thing I touched on, the history of, like, it draws on the history of the smuggling that went on, back in the day, centuries ago. Is the one thing that always stuck with me about Blackgang Chine is probably its most famous attraction, I suppose. Is even before you get in there, right at the start, there is like I don't know how big he is exactly, but this massive fiberglass statue of a smuggler right outside, and that is really, if you think of one image of Blackgang Chine, that's probably the one that you'll get. Really sets the tone, before you get in there. And it's got its own, apparently it's got its own ghost stories as well, a little bit like I touched on with Bradley Woods. Can't find a lot of information about it, but apparently as recently as 2008 there was a sighting of a ghost of a little girl skipping near the Crooked House. So I'd be very interested to hear if anyone else has got any other stories, ghost stories in particular, linked with Blackgang Chine. The macabre side of Blackgang Chine for me is, anyone who knows it, or if you want to go and find out more, Rumpus Mansion. Again, if you read A Necessary End, I'm not doing this episode as a cheap plug, this is just one place that really fed into that book when I wrote it. Rumpus Mansion is like a walkthrough. It's kind of like, considered like a ghost train, I suppose, but it's a haunted house. You walk through and it's got creepy animated displays of boggarts, goblins, witches. It's somewhere I think even my kids would struggle to walk through now if they went back to it. But if anyone out there has got any fun or creepy stories about Blackgang Chine that I may not have heard, that didn't make it into my book, by all means, comment on any of the posts associated with the podcast or with this episode in particular. I'll be really, really interested to finding out more about that side of it. But yeah, Blackgang Chine, definitely, get on there, find out for yourselves, or get over there and pay a visit if you're taking your family to the Isle of Wight and you want one place to go, one day out. I would always recommend over there. Thank you very much for joining me for this episode of Bite Size Britain, and remember to follow on keep up to date with any future episodes. Please follow us on social media, either search for Bite Size Britain or search for Dead Men's Tales Podcast Network, and keep up to date.
Thank you for listening to a Nerd to Know Media production.